Alright, what's up y'all? Woolie here, and today I wanted to give you some tips that'll help you create your ideal DPS. Um, at least from my perspective, right? These are things that I have done to come to the loadout I currently have. Um, the best thing I could suggest is to decide on what kind of artifacts you want to run, given the power. Because a lot of the comments that I see in my videos and other videos from other creators is what's the best power, what are the best artifacts, and that's kind of subjective. I know it's cliche, but any power in the game can be viable. Some of them do kind of have a stigma against them from years of just, you know, nobody really taking the time to use them. A lot of people kind of go with these cookie cutter loadouts that they see on YouTube, and that's not to say that these loadouts are bad. It's just I don't feel like enough people take the time to make their own loadout. So if there's a power you really want to play, by all means go and play it, because I've seen some crazy DPS out there that are unusual powers. I've seen some good atomic DPS. I've seen some good water DPS. I've seen some good rage DPS. I've seen everything. And when I inspect them, they're using some pretty interesting artifacts, to say the least. Um, so I know the staples are always going to be Transformation Card, Strategist Card, Eye of Gemini, Solar Amplifier. You don't necessarily need to run those, although I do always recommend running Transformation Card. I will never not recommend it. It really is the perfect artifact in this game, just because of the versatility. It's such a good artifact. It can double as DPS and support role for tank, troll, heal. There's so many variations that you can do with it. But enough about that. So, really, you've got to figure out what artifacts you want to use. What power do you want to use? So, I'll give you a prime example. I had a fire DPS on the villain side and my fire DPS here, which is Woolie on this side. And originally, I was running Transformation Card. I have Gemini and Solar Amplifier on this character, but I noticed that on my villain, who was running Transformation Card, Strategist Card, and Solar Amplifier, he was performing better overall. Not necessarily doing more damage because the artifacts weren't as high, but the consistency in which they were hitting um, really boiled down to the Strategist card over the Eye of Gemini. So even though I had a 200 Eye of Gemini, I am seeing much better damage overall with a 170 Strategist card. You know, so it really comes down to the artifacts that you're using, because skill points and a rotation will only take you so far. You need to find a good rotation that will complement your artifacts based on the power that you're using. So any power that you want to play in the game is absolutely viable, but some artifacts will simply just work better for it. Um, Now, how you come about finding your rotation, that is an interesting one. I'll tell you how I did it. What I would do is I've tested every single power on here, every single one that's a DPS power, to get to my perfect loadout that I consider the perfect loadout for myself. And then I would come and share it on YouTube if I thought somebody was going to get a benefit out of it. Um, I started doing this back when we had the first big update and we had an influx of new players, right? So I wanted to provide a little bit of guidance for new and returning players. So if you go to my channel, like I said, and you go to my playlist, I have a DPS playlist, and a lot of those are fire DPS, and you can kind of see the evolution of my fire DPS through that, where I was constantly changing, because the best way I can recommend testing your own loadout is to just start putting stuff in here and then go and test it at the target and see how well it performs. One way that you can do that is to take a power and come over here, go into the combat tab, and hit it. and then just do it once and see what it hits like, and then swap it out for something else. And then you would swap it out. So I use spontaneous combustion, then I would come over here and I would use mass det, and then I would run over here. Now once you've spent some time figuring out what powers hit the hardest, then you want to start doing a full rotation, right? And then you want to see how well the cooldowns match up. So for example, I do heat vision, wildfire, spontaneous combustion, and then snuff out. And then heat vision's ready to go again. And then wildfire, then spontaneous combustion, then snuff out, and it's ready to go again. So I know that this loadout is going to be very quick. After doing some testing, I know it's going to hit hard. Then I'm going to, after testing this for a little while, that's up to you how long you want to spend at the target doing that. But I do recommend swapping powers in and out, so that you can get an idea of how hard it's going to hit. So once you've spent time swapping powers out and you've got a rotation where the cooldowns match, because you don't want to get stuck where you cast 3 or 4 powers and then everything's on cooldown and you have nothing to use. That's bad, right? Then you're just standing there for a second. So we want our cooldowns to flow very fluidly. We want them to be very consistent, to where as soon as you finish one power, the next one is ready. As soon as you hit that one, the next one is ready. When you're done with that one, the next one is ready. And then your fresh power is ready to go again when you hit the finisher, or when you hit the last power that you're going to use. And you can go straight back into your loadout and rotation. And that's where you want to be. You want to find what hits the hardest, then you want to put it into a loadout where the rotation is going to match and just be fluid when it flows. You want it to just stream like water, just consistent, right? Those are the basic starter tips for starting your loadout. Now, once you have figured out what you think is going to be hitting very hard and what has a good rotation, then I want you to go into a duo. Do a couple of duos. I want you to go into a 4-man after that. And then finally I want you to go and test it in a raid. Ideally with the duos, just pug if you have to, but if you know somebody who is a good DPS and they're, moderately at the same level as you, with similar skill points, similar artifact levels, test against them, comp with them. One of the things that I would do is when I would sit here and I would spend 30 or 40 minutes or an hour testing my loadout and getting it just right, I would call on one of my friends who I know, or who I consider to be a top tier DPS in my eyes. I would comp with them in a couple of duos, and then I would gauge my damage based off of that, because I know that they're always going to perform at the top of the board. I want to see how well my loadout performs against them, and that would be my default, I guess you can say, of how I kind of perceive if my loadout is good or not, right? And so those are some of the things that you can do to come to a good loadout for you, right? Now, it's also a good idea to do some research. I'm not going to tell you to use specifically what somebody on YouTube has. You can't really go wrong with that though. But if you want to do your own loadout, you want to make your own loadout, or you just want to use an uncommon power that a lot of people don't really DPS with, like water, or let's say atomic or rage or something like that. If you just want to use something that is just not as common, that's how you would start doing your testing. And again, you would base it around the artifacts that you use. So for me, I kind of knew I wanted to get rid of Eye Gemini and gravitate towards the strategist card. Even though I had a 200 strategist card on this character previously, I had swapped it out for Eye of Gemini, and so I no longer had it. But over time, my loadout changed because I kept testing. I was never satisfied. And so when I would get out DPS'd by somebody, I would inspect them. I would look at what power they're using, and then I would inspect them and see what kind of artifacts they were using. Because even though I had 200 artifacts and I was running fire and I was hitting very hard, I would get out DPS sometimes. And that's okay. You're going to get out DPS sometimes. But when you start getting blown out of the water, it's time to go back to the drawing board, my friend. There's absolutely no reason that you need to be... If you have 200 artifacts, right, you should not be getting blown out by 20 or 30 mil. Unless it's a precision DPS who is a real precision DPS. Because as far as precision goes, not just anybody can pick it up and play. I'm just going to tell you that. Like, regardless of how the greater community feels about it, you have to be skilled to be a precision DPS and be a good precision DPS. Because you can easily just go precision and hit good numbers, but if you want to be that top tier precision DPS that you see just annihilating the boards, there's going to be a lot of clipping involved. There's going to be a lot of smaller details that you really need to practice and hone. So I'll just leave that for what it is. Not everybody can be a precision DPS. But I digress. Let's get back to the topic here. You want to, especially if you're running Might, you want to base that assumption off of another Might DPS who is outperforming you at every level. Then you know that you need to go back to the drawing board because you've actually met a real DPS who has taken the time to craft their loadout and they put you to the test. You need to change something. You need to change it up. You got to figure out what's wrong. Maybe it's your artifacts. Maybe it's just your loadout. More often than not, it's going to be your loadout. And so you come back and you do more testing. You swap something out. I think a perfect example of that is the last video I did that I just uploaded. It'll be the one right before this one, where we were in the source wall. I was using this same loadout throughout the whole thing, and I was staying right underneath the other two DPS in there. But it wasn't until we got to Perpetua on the last boss that I swapped out spontaneous combustion for mass detonation that I was able to not only catch them, but pull ahead by a significant amount. I went from being, 2 to 3 mil underneath them to being a few mil ahead of them by just making that small tweak. And sometimes that's really all you need to do is just make a small tweak to your loadout. So I'll tell you, if you have 140, 150 arts, and you're getting beat by somebody with 200 artifacts, that's expected. I don't care if you're max CR. That's expected, and that's okay. What I can tell you is based on that, right? Like based on those numbers, 140, 150 arts. If somebody has 200 artifacts, you'll know your loadout is going to be a top tier loadout for you if you can stay within that 10 to 20 mil range. As far as them being ahead of you, you want them to stay within that 10 to 20 mil range. You want to be consistent. So if you finish the raid on something like the 6th dimension and they have 84 mil and you have 74 mil or 65 mil at the end of it, that's okay. That means your loadout is good, because when you have 200 artifacts, you're going to be performing right alongside of them, and that's just one of the things to take into account. Artifacts really do make all the difference. regardless of how many skill points you have. Skill points will only take you so far, and artifacts will only take you so far. It really comes down to the type of work that you put in on your loadout. So, you don't need to be the best at everything. You just need to find what works for you and be the best at that. Hone that, right? Like I love my fire DPS. It's what I spend a lot of time working on, and I've spent hours over days and weeks creating the perfect loadout, and it took me a few months to get it. But anybody who's used this loadout will probably experience a lot of high damage with it. But I wanted to explain one last thing, is just because, like I said, something looks good on the sparring target does not mean it's going to perform well, and this is why you need to go and test it. So the reason that I don't run mass debt over spontaneous combustion, or the reason I don't run fire burst over spontaneous combustion or wildfire is, for one, it depends on the situation. There are some times I will swap out spontaneous combustion, like I mentioned before, for mass debt, because it's going to be better for me to run mass debt in that scenario, but not all the time. Whereas spontaneous combustion is not really going to be something that fails me, you know. But mass debt will fail me, and sometimes, because the way that the algorithm is with the ads is they're going to target you when you're doing those long casts. Like I said, this is why I don't run it very often. So I'll give you an example. I'm in a duo, right? And I am going for the cast. That's a 3 to 4 second cast right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it takes 4 seconds for me to get that big hit, for me to get that big crit, right? Okay. So that was altogether about 200,000, roughly, you know, with the damage split. Let's say I'm casting that, and right here, right when it gets towards the end, before it actually goes off, an ad lunges me and knocks me over. Well, I've lost all that damage. Okay, and in terms of a loadout, a good loadout that is hitting like it should be hitting, that's 4 to 500,000 that you've potentially lost. That's a lot. If you get knocked over, well, realistically, it's about 3 to 500,000, depending on the fluctuations. But that's a lot of damage to be lost out of your loadout. That's all it takes for somebody to pull ahead of you. And as a DPS, yes, you should be trying to be the top of the boards. That doesn't mean you don't need to be doing the mechanics, but your only job is to be a burner. So yeah, you should do the mechanics. I'm never going to tell you not to do the mechanics. Watch any of my videos, you'll see I go for the mechanics, even as a DPS. But you should be aiming to be the best DPS that you could be. You should be aiming to do as much damage as you can. That is the only reason that you are in the raid, is to burn. So yeah, you should be watching the boards for that. But if you're constantly getting knocked over or interrupted from using one of those big hit powers, that's not a good thing. So there's certain situations where certain powers are just not going to work. And that's really all there is to it. So you need to kind of change it up. You need to have a backup plan for that. Now, my suggestion is always going to be to not stagger between single target and AoE damage. Focus on one and perfect that before you start trying to do something else. Because if you spend a lot of time switching between it, you can mess yourself up. It's good to have a loadout for both. Personally, I don't like doing it. I find one loadout that is going to benefit everything, and I just stick with it. It's just, I don't know. I get some kind of anxiety or something by having to switch my loadouts a lot. So I just like to stick with one. That sounds silly, but it is what it is, and that's just how I play. But it's really just a matter of testing, guys. You just need to take the time to craft around your artifacts, and that's really the best thing that I can tell you, is take the time to work on your loadout for you and be the best that you can be at that. Like I said, you don't need to be the best at everything. You just want to be the best at one thing, and that's okay. That's what you want to be. So if you want to be a DPS, be the best DPS that you can be by never being satisfied. Never be complacent with your loadout, because there is going to be somebody out there who's going to be better. They're going to hit harder. They're going to be faster. The loadout's going to be quicker, and it's going to perform overall better. They're going to have different artifacts. Maybe they have the same artifacts, but you need to keep pushing. You never want to be satisfied. There will be a point to where you come to maybe wanting to change out your artifacts. At that point, you may need to tweak your loadout, because your loadout will change based on the artifacts that you're using. That's how I got to this one. Like I said, there's plenty of videos that I've done where you can see the evolution of my loadout change based on the artifacts that I was using. I was using Grim for a while, didn't really care for it. It's an artifact I don't really like. Some people make it work for them. I just prefer not to use it. But again, that's subjective, and it's based on the power that you're using. So there may be some different things you want to try, right? Like, I know with my sorcery DPS, I used to be sorcery on this character, and I used to run heat vision on him. So before I was fire, I was sorcery, and I was sorcery on this character, and I was running heat vision with that one. And you can see now I'm playing sorcery on my other character, but I'm not using solar amplifier. I'm not using heat vision. I'm still using transformation card and strategist card, but in place of heat vision, I have opted to run Quizlet, and instead of running heat vision with solar amplifier, I'm running Quizlet with the PI. I forget what the name of it is right now, but it's the power interaction, and it's a very good burst hit. And that's one of the things I wanted to also kind of mention, is that PI moves were essential back in the day. I've played this game since 2012, so I've been here for all of the changes. I've been here for the advanced mechanics. I've been here for the birth of weapon mastery. I was here in 2015, 2016, when skill points just did not matter at all, and everything was clamped to your combat rating. And then that changed, and we went back to skill points, a year or two later. So I've been here for all of these changes, and one thing I can tell you is that, like I said, on paper things look good, but using your loadout with a PI or a power interaction is not always going to be the way to go, especially when you have artifacts that will benefit that, because artifacts have changed the way that this game has played and the way that these powers have played in such a way that it really is a significant difference, because you just don't need a power interaction on your loadout depending on what kind of artifacts you're using. In some cases, it may actually be a hindrance. That sounds silly, because on paper it looks like it would do better. But let's take water, for example. If you were to run bubble, it looks like it would be good, but it's not always good to have into your DPS. I can tell you that. It would look good for, like, let's say rage. Plasma Wretch looks good for your power interaction, but it takes too long to cast. And that sounds silly, like I said, because it does not take long to cast, but when you consider that every second that you spend trying to set up your loadout for extra damage, so if I hit Plasma Wretch and then I start going into my damage, that 2 or 3 seconds that it takes to cast it and get out of it and into it, there's so much damage that I have just lost because I'm not being consistent with my damage, because I'm having to compromise to get the power interaction. And it sounds like the power interaction should, in theory, on paper, give you more damage. It actually gives you less. And these are things that you need to go and test for yourself. Like I said, you need to test at the sparring target, and then you need to take it into live content. And I always recommend working up from the duos and the four-mans and run more than one to make sure that you're getting consistent damage. And always inspect the other DPS in there to see what they're running, so you can kind of gauge your damage based off of their artifacts and their powers, and see how well you're going to perform. And those are just some of the tips that I can give to you to create your perfect loadout. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the parsers. 10-second parsers are always going to be my recommendation for creating your loadout. I know there's been some talk about 60-second parsers in the comments, and we'll do those on the DPS videos. But again, the reason that I don't base my damage off of 60-second parsers is because there is no situation in this game, whether it be in a solo, in a duo, in a four-man alert, in a raid, or in an open world bounty, there is no situation where you are going to sit there and DPS for 60 seconds unhindered. You are going to get frozen. You are going to get knocked over. You are going to get interrupted. You are going to have to avoid a group of ads. You are going to have to avoid an AoE. You are going to have to block from a boss mechanic. There's so many situations where you are not going to be able to perform a full rotation sometimes for multiple times throughout that run. There's situations where you may not be able to DPS for more than 10 seconds at a time, or even less than that, because you have to avoid those mechanics, or you get interrupted by those mechanics, or you get knocked out. There's so many variables you need to account for, and this is why you need your loadout to be a quick and fast DPS. That is always going to be my recommendation over these long casting powers that hit very hard but take forever to cast, because if you get interrupted, you've just lost half your damage. And that sounds crazy, but when you start testing, you will see that 3 seconds wasted is half your damage gone in a 10-second parse. It's half your damage gone, and that's a significant number. It's something that you may not be thinking about until you start testing for yourself and you're seeing how the damage runs. Like I said, getting interrupted on something like mass detonation or fire burst is absolutely devastating to your overall damage. So things to keep in mind, guys. Anyways, for this video just keeps running, and I feel like we can just talk all day. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. So these are just some tips to help you get started on building your DPS, and things to think about and to consider, and what to look for when you go into content. But if you're new to the channel, stick around, give me a like, give me a subscribe. If you're returning, appreciate you. I haven't seen a lot of familiar names in the comments, so really appreciate that, guys. I never intended to start this channel to get, be a big YouTuber or anything like that. I started this channel for the influx of new players that were coming in back when we got the House of Legends originally, because there was a lot of new players, so I wanted to impart some of the stuff that I've learned over the last 10-11 years playing this game, that would hopefully get some of these guys to stick around so that we continue to have a healthy population in this game. But I'm sure this video has already ran for way longer than I intended it to, so thank you, guys. Give me a like, give me a subscribe. I'll check you next time. Woolie out. I gotta go to work. Peace.